legislation. That's out of respect for the fact that there are sharply different views on this extraordinarily important question. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes and 15 seconds to my colleague from North Carolina.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague from Florida for yielding me time to speak on this importance of protecting defenseless unborn children and ensuring taxpayer monies not used to pay for elective abortions. I do want to explain to my glib friend from Vermont, who is so good on the floor, that the Hyde Amendment itself covers plans as well as direct funding. So I think the people need to know there's a slight correction to the comments that he made. According to a CNN poll last month, Madam Speaker, more than 60% of Americans oppose taxpayer funding for abortion. Today, this House has the historic opportunity to end the patchwork of policies that are intended to prohibit taxpayer funding for abortion, and by passing a government-wide prohibition on funding elective abortions. H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, codifies many long-standing pro-life protections that have been passed under both Republican and Democrat-controlled Congresses. In fact, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi has voted 14 times to prohibit taxpayer funding for abortion in the District of Columbia. President Obama voted against taxpayer funding of abortion in the District of Columbia twice when he was in the Senate, and since being elected president, he signed appropriations legislation into law that prohibits this funding. As you can see, Madam Speaker, opposition to taxpayer funding for abortion is bipartisan, bicameral, and supported by the American people. There's nothing more important than protecting voiceless, unborn children and their families from the travesty of abortion. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to vote for life by voting in favor of this rule and the underlying bill, and say that my colleague from Vermont said we can differ on opinions, but this is the right position to take. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono.
Gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman from New York. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the rule and in opposition to H.R. 3, a bill that threatens women's health and access to care. Over the past 2 weeks, as I traveled in my district, the top-of-mind issues were the economy and jobs. Now that we're back in D.C., instead of working together on bills that move our economy forward, we're asked to debate divisive social policy. Clearly, the priorities of the Republican majority do not match those of the people of Hawaii. There are those who will say that H.R. 3 maintains the status quo. Not so. H.R. 3 is an extreme, radical measure that could deny tax credits for small businesses, take us back to the days when a woman had to prove that she was a victim of rape, and violate women's medical privacy rights. Do you think small business owners have the time and needed expertise to determine if their insurance plan covers abortions? Do you want to take our country back to the days when a woman had to prove that she resisted her rapist? Do you want to share your medical history with an IRS audit? I was a member of the state legislature in the 1980s in Hawaii when I worked with women and victim advocacy groups to change our sexual assault laws so that the prosecution focused on the perpetrator of the rape rather than on the actions of the victim. Our court system in those days, because of our law, victimized the victims of rape. Hawaii changed its laws. This bill takes us back to those days when a woman had to show that she resisted. Hawaii was also the first state in the nation to decriminalize abortion and give a woman the right to choose. The person who carried this bill in the legislature was Senator Vince Yano, a devout Catholic. Governor Jack Burns, a devout Catholic. He went to Mass every single day. He allowed this bill to become law in Hawaii in spite of the fact that he had a lot of pressure as a Catholic to veto this bill. He could have done so. He respected the right of a woman to choose. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting against this rule and this bill. Aloha.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my colleague from Michigan, Mr. Huizenga.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for this opportunity. You're seeing the old arguments of Washington versus the new realities of America. We have two distinct issues here. Those two issues are, one, life, two, the taxpayer. And I think those things are becoming very stark. Here we are, a situation where a president has signed an executive order to do many of the exact same things, to not allow federal-funded abortions to be happening. Yet somehow we shouldn't be putting this into law. It seems common sense that we would do that. We need to do this to protect the taxpayer. You look at polling, you look at the number of things that are going on. We cannot allow federal funds to be used and our taxpayers to be used for this procedure. Now let's move on to life. We know the sanctity of life that is there from that very conception till natural death. And we need to protect that. We need to protect that atmosphere as a government. That is not our job to promote that. It is our job to promote that horrendous operation. It's our job to protect those children, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this legislation. You know, gas prices are approaching $5 a gallon. Millions of Americans are looking for work, and we're busy turning the tax code into a moral club. Forget that abortion is a legal procedure. Forget the Republicans want limited government when it comes to protecting you in the workplace, but big government when it comes to regulating your bedroom. This isn't about anyone's position on abortion. Roe v. Wade was decided 38 years ago. It's the law of the land. This is about whether we should use the tax code as a moral club to impose the religious beliefs of a few members of Congress on the entire nation. What's next? Some find it immoral to drink alcohol or gamble. Should we outlaw business deductions for meals that include wine? How about business conventions in Las Vegas? Many people are morally opposed to profanity. Maybe we should make it against the law to swear when filling out your taxes. Now, how about more serious issues? Many of my constituents think the war in Iraq is immoral. Same goes for subsidies for big oil and tax breaks that reward corporations for shipping our jobs overseas. Singling out abortion is wrong. Even worse, it's a distraction from the serious challenges our nation faces. If Republicans want to overturn Roe v. Wade, they should draft a bill and give it their best shot. But don't use the tax code as a bludgeon. You don't have the votes. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my colleague from New Jersey.
Ohio.
I'm sorry, Ohio. That's Mr. Shabbat.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. A majority of Americans have made it clear that they oppose the government using their tax dollars to pay for abortions. And it's time that we permanently extend the Hyde Amendment, which bans this irresponsible practice. Particularly in our current budget situation, the federal government should not be subsidizing abortions. Additionally, this bill permanently extends important legal protections for doctors and other health care providers who refuse to perform abortions to which they are morally opposed. Every doctor and health care provider deserves the right to act according to his or her own conscience, and this important legislation will ensure that he or she is not punished for doing so. Madam Speaker, the American people support this legislation. They do not want their tax dollars used to pay for abortions. Let's stand together today and do the fiscally and morally responsible thing, vote to pass H.R. 3. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if a proposal were brought to the House floor that said the following, if an American takes a charitable deduction, makes a charitable contribution, takes a deduction on his income tax return, that we're going to disallow the charitable deduction if the group that's receiving the money promotes gun ownership, gun rights, or gun education. I suspect it would not get one vote on the Republican side of the aisle, and it shouldn't get any votes on the Democratic side of the aisle because it's wrong and it's probably unconstitutional. That is exactly what the underlying bill does here. It says that an American exercising his or her constitutional right, in this case her constitutional right, with their own money, will suffer a negative tax consequence because the majority wants them to. Understand this. If an American woman, with her own money, chooses to exercise her constitutional right, she will be suffering an increase in taxes as a result of making this decision. Now, I scarcely say that anyone on the majority side would agree that if we picked one of their favorite social issues and said we're going to raise taxes on people who engage in that social issue, much less than a constitutional right, that they would agree with this. This is not a debate about abortion. This is a debate about privacy. It's a debate about individual liberty and the right of people to do what they choose with their own money, particularly when they're enforcing one of their own constitutional rights. I would also say, for the record, it's my understanding that if this bill is carried out, a person who is a minor who is a victim of statutory rape may not be able to avail herself of her constitutional rights with her family's own money. I would ask for 30 more seconds.
I yield the gentleman 30 seconds.
I know very well, Madam Speaker, that people feel passionately about the right to life and the right to choose, and this is the forum in which that debate ought to take place. But using the Internal Revenue Code to either punish or reward certain social conduct, particularly conduct that is in the exercise of a constitutional right, is wrong. And if anyone on the minority side would like to tell me that they would vote for that NRA provision, I welcome that. I wouldn't, because it's an impermissible, unconstitutional burden on the constitutional rights of Americans. So is this.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my colleague, Dr. Rowe from Tennessee.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. I thank the Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding Abortion Act. I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation, and as an obstetrician and gynecologist, I've delivered nearly 5,000 babies, and I strongly support the sanctity of life. I believe life is a precious gift from God. It begins at conception, and I've seen human development occur from the earliest stages of a small fetus all the way through birth. That the magic of the heartbeat at 26 to 28 days post-conception is indescribable. And I feel like this strengthens my conviction of the right to life. Since 1976, until the passage of President Obama's health care reform law, Congress prevented taxpayer funding for abortions. Unless abortion specifically excluded from federal insurance plans, the courts and administrative agencies have historically mandated it. That's why the language in H.R. 3 is so important and necessary. It explicitly states that taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund abortion. Abortion is not a business our government should be involved in. And because something's legal doesn't mean you should do it. Regardless of how people felt about the President's health care law, people shared the belief that the President's executive order on this subject was simply insufficient. I agree with this concern and believe that further efforts need to be made to ensure that no taxpayer funds are ever used for this purpose. Under H.R. 3, federal funds are statutorily prohibited from being involved in any type of health care coverage or benefits that include abortion. This means future presidents, or even our president, can't go back and insert abortion coverage on a whim. As legislators, we carry the responsibility and privilege to protect those who do not have a voice. We must make our laws consistent with our science and restore full legal protections to all waiting to be born. This starts with legislation like H.R. 3. One of government's core functions is to protect the most innocent among us, and I will do my best to ensure that government fulfills its duty. I will always fight for the right to life because it is my belief that we are unique creations of God who knows us, loves us, even before we conceived. I thank the gentlelady, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding and for her strong work on this bill. Madam Speaker, this bill is unprecedented in a number of ways. It's unprecedented in that it uniquely affects my district, and yet I was not allowed to testify at the hearing of the Judiciary Committee where it was considered. It is unprecedented in its attack on a woman's right to choose, going well beyond the Hyde Amendment, and it is unprecedented in seeking to federalize local funds from the District of Columbia. Section 309 of this bill would make permanent the attachment in the recent 2011 spending bill that keeps the district from spending its own local funds on abortions for poor women. That's bad enough. But the party that came to power, even to devolve federal power back to the states, is engaged in the reverse process in this bill, in taking what has always been understood in our Constitution to be local power, and worse, local money, and deciding how it should be spent. It is a dictatorship of local funds. It goes against every principle that the majority claims when it cites the Constitution. It goes against the accepted practice, a practice you can do nothing about in the states, where 17 states have, of course, spent their own local funds on abortions for poor women for decades, recognizing that this could not be done with federal money. The District of Columbia does not ask for 1 cent of federal money. In the same way, the District of Columbia demands that its local funds be kept local for us as for every member of this body.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentlelady, but before I begin my remarks, I just have to say that I'm really shocked by the statement from my friend and colleague from the state of New Jersey as well, when he basically makes the bold statement that basically by taking away a subsidy of sorts of what we're doing here, and that somehow or other translates to a tax increase on an individual. Nothing, of course, is done in this legislation to that effect. But I come to the floor today and rise in full support of H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. And I commend everyone who has worked on this, especially my other colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, for not only for sponsoring the bill before us today, but for being a leader on this important issue. You see, by passing this bill, what we really do is establish a permanent government-wide prohibition on subsidies for abortion and abortion coverage, while giving the doctors opposed to abortion certain protections to safeguard them from what? From performing abortions against their will. This is a common-sense bill. It's consistent with the opinions of the majority of Americans who have voiced opposition to federal funding for abortion. See, I believe that the time has come to do away with the patchwork ban currently in place with the laws that extend the Hyde Amendment to all aspects of spending authority here in Congress. Now, I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will tell you that cutting off funding to abortion services will only cause abortion rates to do what? Rise, they say. But just the opposite. In fact, published research by the pro-abortion Alan Guttmacher Institute shows what? That we would actually see a 25% decrease in abortions. Furthermore, contrary to what the opposition would have you believe, this legislation will not affect funding for family planning services. It will only prevent funding and subsidies for abortion and abortion coverages. So, it's important to point out that taxpayers across the country do not believe that they should be funding abortion coverage. What? Just last week in Indiana, Governor Daniels signed probably the most comprehensive taxpayer protection law. Another 20 seconds?
Additional 30 seconds.
Right. I appreciate
Gentleman's
that.
recognized
As I
for
was saying,
additional
just
30
last
seconds.
week in Indiana, the governor signed probably the most comprehensive taxpayer protection laws to prevent taxpayers from doing what? Subsidizing abortion. As I was reading the article in the LA Times, they said this is probably going to go in other states. And why is that? Because it's the will of the people. Let me tell you, let me conclude on this. I'm the father of two beautiful girls. When I look at them, I see the promise of tomorrow. My life is without question better for the love I share with them. America is better for each child in life that is here. So I will come to this floor and continue to fight to protect the most fundamental right of the unborn and each of us, the right to life.
Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield 1 3/4 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
1 3/4 minutes.
I thank the lady for her leadership, for yielding, and for her leadership not only on this but so many important issues. I want to make it very clear in response to the gentleman's statement, there are no taxpayer-funded abortions now. There weren't any yesterday, and there won't be any in the future. H.R. 3 goes far beyond current law. It is stunning in its scope, appalling in its indifference, and outrageous in its arrogance. The right to choose is absolutely meaningless without access to choice. And H.R. 3 creates obstacles for women to access safe, legal, and constitutionally protected health care. This makes access to abortion coverage incredibly difficult. And I would say that the bill is not only an attack on women's rights, it's also an attack on the rights of private insurance companies and small businesses. It tells private insurance companies how to run their businesses, raises compliance costs for small businesses, and even tells the local government how they may spend their money. The bill manages to offend nearly every high-sounding principle the other side says they stand for. So if you truly believe in the freedom of the individual and the wisdom of the free market, vote no on this absolutely appalling piece of work. It is anti-woman, anti-choice, anti-respect, and anti-business. It is a totally flawed bill, goes far further than any existing law, and it is the deepest and strongest attack on a woman's right to choose that has come before this body in my lifetime. And the Republican majority says its priority is jobs and job creation, but their actions speak louder than words. They want to come into the bedroom. They want to come between a woman and her doctor. It is an appalling bill. Please vote no.
The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to Mr. Fincher, my colleague from Georgia. Tennessee, my bad.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise in support of the rule. Over 20 years ago, in his 1985 book, For Every Idle Silence, Congressman Hyde wrote, "It is becoming culturally fashionable to protect the defenseless unborn." Those words hold even truer today as polling continually shows the majority of Americans oppose the vast majority of abortions, and more Americans consider themselves pro-life more than ever. Polls also show that a large majority of Americans oppose taxpayer subsidies for abortion and abortion coverage. An April 2011 CNN poll found that 61% of respondents oppose using public funds for abortion. A November 2009 Washington Post poll showed 61% of respondents opposed government subsidies for health insurance that includes abortion. A September 2009 International Communications Research poll showed that 67% of respondents opposed measures that would require people to pay for abortion coverage with their federal taxes. Our constituents and our conscience demand us that we wait no longer. We must permanently end taxpayer funding of abortion and protect the lives of the unborn children. I yield back.
From New York.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire of my colleague if he has further speakers?
I do have additional speakers.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Florida.
I yield 2 minutes to Mr. King, my colleague from Iowa.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate the privilege to come here to the floor and stand up for the rights of the innocent unborn in this country. At the root of this question, the root of this issue is the question of, what is human life, and is it sacred in all of its forms, and at what instant does it begin? And I think all of us with a conscience will recognize that human life needs to be sacred in all of its forms, and it begins at the instant of conception. And once we come to that conclusion, we stand up to defend every voiceless, innocent miracle that's on its way into breathing free air in this country. And to think that we are compelling the American taxpayer to fund abortions across this country and in foreign lands on occasion because we can't quite hear that voice. Henry Hyde heard that voice. And we're standing up with and for Henry Hyde. I so much appreciate him and Chris Smith, who is the principal author of the underlying legislation. I rise in support of this rule, Madam Speaker, and I rise in support of the innocent unborn. The conscience of America must be heard in this debate today on this rule and on the underlying bill. The voice of the voiceless need to be heard. That those people who were not heard in this life, we will hear from in the next, as Henry Hyde so eloquently said. But an America that is a pro-life America, with over 60% that oppose federal funding, taxpayer-funded abortions, this is a consistent position. It reflects the will of the American people. We must draw this line, not just with Planned Parenthood, but every abortion provider in the country. If they can't make it in the market on their own, we have no business subsidizing them without regard to the impact on our overall economy. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased and proud to be here today to take this stand, and I'm pleased and proud of the entire pro-life caucus that's here in the United States Congress, both Democrats and Republicans alike, who have done so much over the years to bring us to this point of consensus. And this is a consensus that will be reflected on this vote on the rule and on the vote in the underlying bill, a consensus of the American people with a resounding support for this rule and the underlying bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York.
I'll continue to reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
I have no further speakers. The gentlelady would like to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York.
I am prepared to close. I first want to remind people what we'd said about statutory rape. When this bill was first introduced, it modified the long-standing rape exemption to the Hyde Amendment by adding the term forcible before the word rape. In other words, the victim of rape had to show wounds and other matters that she really was forcibly raped before she could be covered. But they changed that because there was such an outcry, but they found another way to get to this, to exclude other victims of rape. Just saying those words scandalizes me. The House Judiciary Committee report, which will be used by the courts to interpret the intent of this bill, says the bill will not allow the federal government to subsidize abortions in cases of statutory rape, claiming that this reflects existing law, and of course it does not. Statutory rape is one of the most serious of crimes because the young woman involved is not given consent and indeed is not allowed to because of her age. How dare we do that? Have they not suffered enough? The Hyde Amendment does not distinguish between statutory rape or any other kind of rape. In fact, the 1978 regulation implementing the Hyde Amendment makes clear that it includes victims of statutory rape in the funding exemption. Now, if most people in the United States don't want their tax money used for abortions, they can relax. It has not been, we've not been using tax money for 38 years. We're not going to change that with this bill. That's not the intent of this bill at all. It's simply the title, which is meaningless. But what it does do, it increases taxes on the middle class and lower-income women and their families, but it singles out small business employers and penalizes them if they provide comprehensive insurance coverage that includes abortion. Nearly two-thirds of all voters polled, this is two-thirds, oppose this draconian change in the tax system for small business and individuals with plans that cover abortion. In fact, even most Republicans, Tea Party supporters, anti-abortion workers, and evangelical Christians oppose the tax increase. The head of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce wrote in Monday in the Hill, H.R. 3 is a slap in the face of the millions of small businesses now offering health insurance to their employees and eligible for the new tax credits that come from the new health care bill. I ask unanimous consent, Madam Speaker, to insert the full text of this column from the head of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce describing this bill as a slap
Without
in
objection.
the face. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I need to correct one thing, that the word forcible is nowhere in the statute or the legislation as we have on the floor. Madam Speaker, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have you believe that H.R. 3 is about taking away the women's right to choose. That is simply not true. H.R. 3 is about ensuring that taxpayers aren't on the hook for paying for that choice. My Democratic colleagues would have you believe that we want to raise your taxes and allow the IRS to audit women. Again, that is simply not true. The bill is about one thing: keeping our tax dollars from being spent for elective abortions on demand. The United States is currently borrowing 42 cents of every dollar we spend. We are in debt and spending money we don't have. We need to bring focus on bringing government back to our core mission. You can't tell me that paying for elective abortions is part of our core mission. With that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
Gentleman from Florida yields back the balance of his time. And without objection, the previous question is ordered. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question is on adoption.
Oh, sorry.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I'd ask the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
On the House floor this afternoon, they've been debating the initial rule for a bill that would block taxpayer funding of abortion, federal funding of abortion, including tax breaks or subsidies for insurance plans. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate and no amendments. This is a 15-minute vote on that rule. Over in the Senate today, they held a couple of votes earlier, some procedural votes on the Small Business Research Bill and also on the nomination of John McConnell to be a district judge in Rhode Island. President Obama at the White House today welcoming the Wounded Warriors group to the White House and also meeting with Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales. The president also conducted an interview today with 60 Minutes that will air this weekend, and CBS News tweets that in that interview, President Obama says he won't release the bin Laden images taken to prove his death. That is from CBS News. But here on the House floor, at least early today, work on a bill blocking federal funding of abortion, and later today they will finish up work on a bill repealing mandatory funding for the construction of school-based health centers. We spoke a short while ago to a Capitol Hill reporter for an update on both of those bills. We're joined by Julie Rovner of NPR. How does this House abortion funding bill propose to change current law?
Well, of course, the backers of it say what it merely does is writes into permanent policy the Hyde Amendment, which, of course, is the annual funding restriction that gets put into the labor HHS appropriation bill every year that bans federal abortion funding. But what opponents say is that it goes considerably further than that. Specifically, what it does is it limits tax subsidies for people who have abortion as part of a health insurance policy, and of course many people do. Now, this isn't everyone everyone. These are mostly individuals and small businesses who buy insurance, who have abortion as part of a health insurance policy, or people who might pay for an abortion using a tax-preferred account. That would be a flexible spending account or a health reimbursement arrangement or one of those kinds of accounts, and that would now be banned. So there would be no more sort of tax subsidy for anything that has to do with an abortion, either directly paying for an abortion or a health insurance policy that would cover abortion. And that, of course, has never been affected by the Hyde Amendment before. The Hyde Amendment has only applied to direct federal funding of abortion. So this is definitely breaking new ground for federal abortion funding bans.
What can you tell us about the arguments opponents have against this bill?
Well, of course, they're saying that this would be really a tax penalty, and it would raise taxes for a lot of people, and indeed it would. And we've already seen some concerns raised by small businesses. They're saying that, you know, a lot of times coverage of abortion is kind of buried within other things, and they might not even be aware that they have it. They might have to drop their existing health insurance policy, buy new policies, get, you know, re-underwritten as it would, which can be expensive, and that this is really not this would result in a big paperwork burden, a big time burden, that they could end up inadvertently losing tax credits and subsidies that they now have. And of course, there are then abortion rights backers who say that this is really sort of a grab at women's ability to use their own private money to exercise, you know, their right to what is still a legal medical procedure.
What sort of quandary does this present to Democrats who would normally vote for many anti-abortion bills that come up in the House?
Well, you know, it is a difficult vote for certainly some anti-abortion Democrats, and I would think for some, you know, sort of anti-abortion Republicans too. They want to side with, you know, their anti-abortion constituents, but they also want to side with their small business constituents, and this does put them a bit at odds. Also, I think there was some trouble with the drafting of this bill when it got to the Ways and Means Committee. The head of the Joint Committee on Taxation said that it wasn't drafted quite, I think, as sponsors thought. It could affect more small businesses than they'd intended. There's also sort of the awkwardness of you've got the possibility, because there are still exemptions for rape and incest, you'd have the possibility of, you know, the IRS having to become sort of the abortion police, finding out if someone's trying to actually claim a tax, you know, some kind of a tax preference for an abortion. Was this really the result of rape or incest? And, you know, do you have the documentation to prove it? That could be awkward.
Well, assuming it passes the House today, what chances does the bill have in the Senate?
Well, no one thinks it has too much of a chance in the Senate, but of course there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about this in the Senate, would like to see it brought up. So you could see it, you know, you could see people trying to attach it to something, or trying to attach it to something that's must pass, or trying to attach, for instance, to, you know, to the debt ceiling negotiation. So, you know, one wouldn't necessarily say it has no chance in the Senate. The president has issued a veto threat on it, but again, you know, President Clinton, who was also, you know, in favor of abortion rights, ended up signing many anti-abortion restrictions into law, even though he didn't want to, because they came to his desk attached to other things that he basically had to sign. So that's not to say that this bill has no chance.
Well, in addition to the abortion funding bill, the House is back at work on bills repealing parts of the health care law, the funding for parts of the health care law. What have they done so far this week? What do they work on today?
Well, yesterday they passed 238 to 183, a bill that would rescind funding for planning grants for states to try and start to get up and running these exchanges, the marketplaces that would help people, again, individuals and small businesses buy health insurance. And this is starting in 2014 when the requirement comes online that people have insurance. This is kind of ironic, if you will. Yes, the CBO said it would save $14 billion, and that's because it would kind of delay these exchanges from getting up and running. But the CBO also said that it would have the effect of the federal government ending up running a lot of these exchanges instead of the states. Well, of course, the Republicans who are pushing this bill have said that they don't like the idea of the federal government having so much control over the health care system, and yet this bill would result in the federal government having more control over the health care system. But again, this is part of this Republican effort to, if they can't repeal the entire law, they'd like to repeal pieces of the law. And they're also debating another bill that they will vote on that would rescind a very small piece, $100 million for construction grants, basically for school-based health clinics.
keeping an eye on the health care debate and more. Julie Rovner with NPR. Thank you for that update.
You're welcome.
House is voting on the rule for that bill that would block taxpayer funding of abortion, including tax breaks or subsidies for insurance plans. This is a 15-minute vote. If it passes, the rule allows for an hour of general debate on H.R. 3, and that would be next. Just updating the story from the White House, Julie Pace of the Associated Press reporting that in that interview with CBS, President Obama said he decided he will not release the death photos of Osama bin Laden. More details as we get them for you. Meanwhile, at a NATO news conference earlier today in Brussels, Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen congratulated the U.S. on the killing of Osama bin Laden and said NATO must increase cooperation with Pakistan in order to strengthen efforts against terrorism along its borders with Afghanistan. We'll show you as much of this news conference from today as we can during the remainder of this 15-minute vote.
Good afternoon. Almost 10 years ago, NATO took an unprecedented decision. It invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. Allies made clear that the September 11 attacks on the United States were an attack on all. This week, the United States marked a significant success for the security of all allies and the security of the nations which have joined us in our efforts to combat the scourge of global terrorism. I congratulated President Obama and all those involved in the operation against the founder of Al-Qaeda, the man who was directly responsible for the loss of thousands of innocent lives on September 11 and in other terrorist atrocities across the world. You may ask, what does that mean to NATO? And what does that mean to our mission in Afghanistan? And my message is clear. We will stay the course. International terrorism continues to pose a direct threat to the security of our nations and to stability across the world. Our reason for being in Afghanistan is clear, and our strategy will not change. NATO allies and partners will continue the mission to ensure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for extremism, but develops in peace and security. With gradual transition to lead Afghan responsibility for security, we have entered a new phase. That transition process remains fully on track, and with our Afghan partners, we aim to complete it by 2014. NATO stands for the values of freedom, democracy, and humanity. Those values that Osama bin Laden wanted to defeat. We will continue to stand for those values from Afghanistan to Libya. And the democratic upheavals across North Africa and the Middle East show a clear rejection of extremism and indiscriminate attacks against civilians. It is now just over a month since NATO took command of all military operations to protect civilians in Libya under United Nations Resolution 1973. That is our mandate, and we are fulfilling that mandate. NATO aircraft have flown over 5,000 sorties at a consistent rate of more than 1,000 per week. Almost half have been strike sorties. NATO pilots are striking persistently, but with care and precision. In Misrata and in other parts of this vast country, we have protected large numbers of civilians against the onslaught of Gaddafi's regime. And we are steadily degrading his ability to harm his own people. NATO is saving lives in Libya. We are making sure that critical capabilities can no longer be used to launch and sustain attacks against cities and civilians, such as battle tanks, heavy artillery and multiple rocket launchers. We are undermining the regime's ability to command and control those brutal attacks from bunkers and communication centers. We are reducing the Libyan regime's ability to sustain, supply and reinforce its forces in the field. Because of the arms embargo we enforce, Gaddafi cannot buy the arms he wants to continue his attacks against civilians. Because of the no-fly zone we police, he cannot strike at men, women and children from the sky. And because of the skill and courage of our pilots, he can no longer use massed formations of heavy armor to threaten cities, as he did to Benghazi before our operation began. So, the nature of the conflict has changed significantly in a month. But what has not changed and will not change is the resolve of NATO and our partners. Because our responsibility is clear: to protect civilian life, as the United Nations Security Council mandated. Our task is clear: to make sure that nobody can threaten or attack civilians or civilian populated areas anywhere in Libya. Our goals are clear. We have set 3 clear military objectives. First, all attacks and threats against civilians must cease. Second, all forces that threaten civilians, including snipers and mercenaries, must verifiably return to their bases. And 3, free and unhindered humanitarian access must be guaranteed to all those in Libya who need aid. That is what NATO and partner foreign ministers agreed in Berlin, and that is what we will continue to do for as long as necessary. Certains d'entre vous se demandent peut-être.
Some of you may be asking how long that will take. That is a question which NATO alone cannot answer. But it is hard to imagine that the threat against civilians can cease while Gaddafi remains in power. We have always stated quite clearly that there can be no purely military solution to this crisis. That is why we are fully engaged with our regional and international partners as we strive for a political solution to this conflict that responds to the legitimate aspirations of the people of Libya. I will be joining the contact group in Rome tomorrow to brief my colleagues on our military operations. We will also discuss the way forward on the political front to find a solution that meets the aspirations of the Libyan people.
We are playing our part to fulfill the United Nations mandate to save lives in Libya and to help the people of Libya shape their own future. And I am now ready to take your questions.
And I'd be grateful if you could turn your mobile devices to silent, perhaps. And we can start over there, Wall Street Journal.
Stephen Fiddler from the Wall Street Journal. A few weeks ago, I think you or one of your colleagues gave an estimate of the degrading of Gaddafi's forces by 30%. I wondered if you were able to update us on that, not only quantitatively but also qualitatively, in the sense of specifically what has NATO done and to reduce the capabilities of operation of the Gaddafi forces. Can you be as specific as you can, and what kind of briefing would you give tomorrow to your colleagues in Rome about what NATO's force operations have achieved?
I'm not able to give you updated figures, but I can assure you that we continue to make progress. We have hit important military targets, tanks, armored vehicles, as I told you, rocket launchers, command and control centers. All these military facilities could be used and have been used to attack civilians in Libya. So every week, every day, we make new progress, hit important targets, but I'm not able to quantify the degree to which we have degraded Muammar Gaddafi's military capability. But definitely it is much weaker now than it was when our operation started.
Part of today's NATO news conference, and you can watch all of it online in our video library at cspan.org. We did want to update the story. President Obama has said today the White House will not release a photo of Osama bin Laden's body. He made the remarks today during an interview with CBS for the 60 Minutes program, and Taggart Goddard's Political Wire quotes the actual interview, saying, the president saying, quote, "The risks of release outweigh the benefits. Conspiracy theorists around the world would just claim the photos are doctored anyway, and there is real risk that releasing the photos will only serve to inflame public opinion in the Middle East." This is the president speaking. He said again, quote, "Imagine how American people would react if al-Qaeda killed one of our troops or military leaders and put photos of the body on the internet. Osama bin Laden is not a trophy. He is dead. And let's now focus on continuing the fight until al-Qaeda has been eliminated." That's from the Political Wire, quoting the interview with 60 Minutes, which will be on CBS this weekend. The president will be in New York at Ground Zero tomorrow. And also want to let you know that the White House news briefing is coming up in about 5 minutes or so. It's scheduled for 2 p.m. Eastern, so we expect to hear a lot more about this with spokesman Jay Carney, and we will have live coverage of the White House news briefing for you at 2 o'clock Eastern on C-SPAN 3, and you can also watch it online at cspan.org. Here on the House floor, they're wrapping up a vote on the rule for a bill that would block taxpayer funding of abortion, including tax breaks or subsidies for insurance plans. The rule would allow for general debate, and it looks like that will be next. Live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN.
The yeas are 243 and the nays are 177. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Will members please clear the aisles and take your conversations off the floor? Members, cease your conversations or take them off the floor, please. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 237, I call up H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 28, H.R. 3, a bill to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions and to provide for conscience protections and for other purposes.
Please take your conversations off the floor. The gentleman deserves to be heard. The gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include other materials on H.R. 3.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 237, in lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, printed in the bill, the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in House Report 112-71 is adopted and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee of the Judiciary. 10 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and 10 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, each will control 20 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, let me recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, the chief sponsor of H.R. 3, for his persistent leadership over the years on this issue. Many members and the American people have strong feelings about the subject of abortion. But one thing is clear. Federal funding of abortion will lead to more abortions. Funding of abortion will lead to more abortions. For example, in 2009, there were only 220 government financed abortions. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the federal government would pay as many as 675,000 abortions each year without the Hyde Amendment and other provisions that prevent federal funding of abortion. The American people do not want federally funded abortions. A Zogby poll found that 77% of Americans feel that federal funds should never pay for abortions or should pay only to save the life of the mother. That is the policy of the Hyde Amendment, which H.R. 3 would enact into law. H.R. 3 does not ban abortion. It also does not restrict abortions or abortion coverage in health care plans as long as those abortions or plans use only private or state funds. This legislation places no additional legal restrictions on abortions. It simply protects taxpayers from having to fund or subsidize something they morally oppose. H.R. 3 also is necessary to fix the recent health care law. Absolutely nothing in that law prevents the federal funding of abortions under the programs it creates. Neither Congress nor the administration should take the view that they know better than the American people what is good for them. Congress should pass H.R. 3 to codify the long-standing ban on the federal funding of abortions. Madam Chair, I'll reserve the balance of my time.